Welcome to Rishi Research virtual panel on VMworld 2017. I have with me John and Brian from Pivotal, Rob from VirtuStream, and Scott from the New Stack. So we are here to discuss about VMworld 2017, talk about the announcements that were there, and possibly go a little deeper on Pivotal Container Service, VMware's strategy on public cloud, and other topics of interest for the panelists. So Scott, let's start with you. Like, what are the announcements that really caught your attention?
Well, although I particularly enjoyed day one sessions, day two was the reason I was there, to tell you the honest truth. Those of us in the New Stack have been really looking forward to seeing how Pivotal and VMware bring forth their vision for automating containers alongside existing workloads on an homogeneous infrastructure, or something that at least looks homogeneous to the applications. And boy, we did see a lot of that. We saw Pivotal Container Service being demonstrated live on stage. We saw a deployment take place in a matter of seconds, and okay, maybe there were a couple of hitches that made it take 90 seconds instead of 60. But holy cow, there were a lot of people who were comparing that to what they'd seen before with OpenStack. And OpenStack is not measured in seconds. Not a lot about OpenStack is measured in seconds. So I think this is, it was a very successful demonstration on the whole. Yes, it was good to see NSX stretching VMware's reach into the world of Amazon. I think that certainly does help them to combat some of the comparisons that have taken place, true or not, in the CIO's office. When they compare Amazon versus VMware as if they are on two even kills. The reason being that their infrastructure needs to be able to either host the virtual machines that they have in place, or move into pretty much an entirely new world with Amazon Web Services. At least that's what the choice has had to be for the last several years. I think the day one keynotes proved that those days are going away, that there is going to be a bridge between those two worlds, and I do think that was significant. But from a standpoint of container orchestration and distributed workloads, which is a lot of what we cover on the New Stack, at thenewstack.io, by the way, for all our listeners, certainly the day two keynotes were an absolute blast. And I think Cloud Foundry has a lot to be proud of in there, because they were included with the Open Network Broker API, and with BOSH being part of the foundation of Pivotal Container Service. So certainly Cloud Foundry gets to take a bow there as well. And I think the folks who support OpenStack are going to have a lot to answer for. They've got some ground to make up here competitively.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Like, definitely, this is definitely adding pressure to OpenStack, other than the pressure they face as a community. Like, I have my own serious doubts about OpenStack being relevant going forward, but OpenStack Foundation is trying to convince me otherwise. So I have an open mind to take a look at it. But before we go to the other panelists, I want to add my thoughts to what I saw at VMworld from outside. I was mostly following the live stream and following the news that's coming out of VMworld. I couldn't attend the conference. So for me, I wanted to really understand what is VMware's multi-cloud strategy. And I also wanted to understand how Pivotal is going to play in that strategy. So I think I got answers partly for the first one, and definitely in detail about the second one. In my opinion, I think VMware is just getting started on their cloud strategy, to put it bluntly. Like, the announcements they have made with Amazon is good, but it's just a beginning, and I would expect them to go further in terms of their multi-cloud strategy, with BOSH at the center of their strategy. So the way Pivotal is pushing BOSH, I get a feeling that they want to make BOSH the standard for infrastructure services orchestration. So that's my understanding. We will talk to John and Brian later on this topic. That's what I feel, and I think it's just making Amazon work closely with VMware's offering is a natural evolution, but that bridges, as you said, that bridges both worlds together. But I would love to see more about how VMware is going to bridge the VMworld with the multiple cloud providers out there, because definitely not everyone is going to go the Amazon route. There are people who are preferring Azure these days, and Google is trying their best to get attention. So I would love to see where VMware is going with their multi-cloud strategy and how it fits into what they announce in this VMworld. Also, I see Pivotal as that abstraction layer that can seamlessly bridge multi-cloud world, because multi-cloud in terms of infrastructure is messy. The user experience sucks big time. So I think that abstraction offered by Pivotal Cloud Foundry could be a very good abstraction that bridges this multi-cloud world. So it will be interesting to see that. So let's start with John. John, what did you hear? I know you were part of the VMware family, but I would love to hear your perspective on what you heard in VMworld in general about VMware's announcement with AWS as well as Pivotal Container Service.
Thanks, Krish. Yeah, I mean, it's my first VMworld, I have to say. I have a history with Microsoft, so VMworld was in a particular spot, but I have to say the energy was incredible. I don't know if this is a resurgence of private cloud or it's getting some mojo back, but the energy of the conference, the folks we spoke to was great, and obviously we were very excited about the announcements we had on day 2 with PKS. But you know, talking about PKS and so I was in a bunch of customer briefings, and I guess there were 2 types of customer I spoke to. One were customers that were new to Pivotal and new to BOSH, but were certainly thinking about containers. The developers were asking about containers, and obviously Kubernetes is the brand, is the name that everybody's thinking about. So bringing PKS to market and actually showing VMware customers, folks with vSphere, how they could make Kubernetes a reality in their organization without by de-risking it and making it a lot easier, got them very excited. The other customers, and there were a few of these, but there are some customers who are already running with PCF, who already understand BOSH as a way of abstracting, you know, their operations layer, a way of enabling day 2 operations, doing things like high availability, easy upgrades. But they're looking at it and thinking, well, you know, there are some workloads that aren't necessarily a good fit for PCF, but we think that containers would work for those. So the opportunity surface area just increased without them adding a new technology to their operations teams. So it's, if you like, it's another dial tone that sits on top of BOSH, and they were very excited by that.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you. In fact, I wrote a blog on PKS announcement, and it's published in rishidot.com/blog. I wrote the same thing, like for VMware customers and existing Pivotal customers wanting to use Kubernetes, this is the way to go. There is no second opinion about it, because for VMware customers, as you said, PKS is another dial tone sitting on top of that BOSH abstraction. And for Pivotal customers, they really love the services approach taken by Pivotal Cloud Foundry platform. That's why they are with Pivotal, and for them to use Kubernetes under the same platform is a bonus. So I fully understand that. So why would a new customer looking into Kubernetes, who is not a VMware customer or who is not a Pivotal customer, why would that customer be interested in what Pivotal is offering in terms of Kubernetes? Why can't they directly go with one of the Kubernetes offerings out there? It could be OpenShift or Rancher or anything that's out there. Why would they come to Pivotal? Like, does it make cost-benefit sense for them to take BOSH, add a layer of abstraction on top of it, and put another layer of abstraction in terms of Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and then use Kubernetes along with that? Does it really make sense for them?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Krish. And while we haven't actually talked about pricing for PKS, probably worth thinking about Kubernetes. And it was interesting. We had Eric Johnson from Google talk in one of the sessions, and he explained that Kubernetes was built by Google engineers to orchestrate containers, but the Google engineers are used to deploying on Google infrastructure, so they on the Borg. So they don't have to think about VMs. They don't have to think about upgrades. They already have this layer that's working for them. And that's kind of that Kubernetes kind of assumes that the infrastructure is working well for you. So you need something sitting under there to think about those concerns. And if for somebody just working with open source Kubernetes, that's something you have to build or find somewhere else. So whether that's, there are various vendors out there that are trying to help build that layer up. Now, we would obviously say that BOSH is an ideal layer because of some of its heritage. So it was modeled on the Borg originally. And I'm not saying it is the Borg, but it has a lot of the attributes that you really want from that layer. So it's abstracting away from VMs, it does health checks, it looks after Kubernetes as a service, and it looks after the VMs. So if anything, if your etcd or master nodes go down, then BOSH will actually bring those back. That's not something that Kubernetes does itself. But also if the host VMs go down, it will bring those back. And also a key thing is in terms of upgradability. So BOSH has a canary pattern built into it. So that if you want to upgrade a fleet of VMs running the same thing, it will try it out on some of them. If those work, then it will kind of gradually work through the other VMs. So the whole range of things that BOSH adds that Kubernetes doesn't have. And so we haven't added the VMware piece in yet. So that's what I've described. Kubernetes on BOSH is an open source project called Kubo, which is, I think we released that we started working on that in February with Google, and we handed it over to the Cloud Foundry Foundation in June. So that's multi-cloud that works anywhere. What's very cool about PKS is the extra components it adds in terms of VMware. So networking, incredibly difficult with containers. So we add in NSX, which is one of VMware's roaring successes right now. It's on fire. So NSX, you get use rights to that. You also get use rights to Harbor, the container registry. You also get a service broker, which lets you consume Google services. So if you're running on-prem, you can still use things like machine learning, Spanner, and a nice API. So rather than having to deal with BOSH manifests directly, you can just tell BOSH to, spin me up a new Kubernetes cluster, and up it comes. So that whole package really makes it very easy. And that API gets plugged into some of the VMware control panels. So even if you're not a VMware customer today, I think if Kubernetes is something you're looking at, then just the ability to spin Kubernetes up very quickly and have it managed in a reliable way is very attractive.
Okay, so I fully agree with that. In fact, before I go to the other panelists out there, one question I have is, should I embrace BOSH only if I want to eventually become a VMware customer, or will things like Azure and OpenStack be first-class citizens under BOSH? We will come back to the same question on BOSH being the standard later on. I just want to get your quick perspective on, as a customer, should I look at BOSH only if I eventually want to become a VMware customer, or should I embrace it even if I don't want to become a VMware customer?
Another great question. So one of my missions at Pivotal is to raise BOSH kind of as a brand and make people aware of that. Everyone's aware of Chef and Puppet in terms of configuration management, but as good as those solutions are, and they're very powerful, they don't necessarily take you into the day two operations things that we described, like keeping services running, like upgrades. And so we love BOSH because BOSH has been powering Cloud Foundry for 5 years. This is not a new technology we just invented. And so we run BOSH across all of the platforms that support Cloud Foundry, which is VMware, OpenStack, Azure, GCP, and AWS. So very much, BOSH is designed itself to run services. Cloud Foundry, the Elastic Runtime is one of those. Kubernetes is now another, but folks are running other applications like Redis, RabbitMQ on BOSH just as a technology in itself.
Okay, I think we will discuss more about this later after talking to the other panelists. Rao, You are new to EMC Federation, and I know you for a long time, since your time with Six Fusion, and we have been talking about the industry for a long time. So I am pretty excited to have you. So can you talk about your experience in this VMworld as an employee of VirtuStream, and what are your takeaways, and we will go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Krish. Appreciate you having me on. I'll echo the sentiment saying that there was a lot of energy on the ground this year. I was there for the whole week, and it's probably my 5th or 7th VMworld, and I hadn't been to the last couple because the energy had really started to come out of the event a little bit. And I'll definitely say it was 100% back this year. There was a lot going on. Obviously coming into VirtuStream, being in the infrastructure space, the AWS announcement obviously was the big one from that perspective. I personally find it a very interesting announcement for a couple of reasons, right? I number one think we're seeing a shift in the industry. As you go around all of the historical events, you had sort of the VMware world, and you had an Amazon world, and you had an OpenStack world, and you had these sort of specific sort of vendor areas, and it was kind of like if you're in one vendor's party, you can't be in the others. We hadn't seen a lot of mixing of those technologies and visions. It was very much my way or the highway sort of approach. And I think this VMware Cloud on AWS announcement is very much an acknowledgement that, look, it's not a one-stop shop. And this is very much reflecting the movement into large enterprise, right? Startups absolutely can pick a platform, standardize it, and roll with that. But I don't think large enterprises, it's feasible, right? We're going to see 2 to 4, 2 to 6 cloud platforms becoming part of the portfolio the large enterprise uses. And I think this announcement is pretty foundational, setting the stage to say, as an industry, as vendors in the industry, we acknowledge that this is a multi-cloud world. We're going to have 2 to 4, 2 to 6 infrastructure vendors that we use that are fit for purpose, for whatever that purpose happens to be. So I think, from my perspective, that was a big announcement. It was nice to see VMware sort of very clearly communicate where they're going to sit in the stack, and that they are also viewing sort of a multi-platform type of world. And obviously, from the VirtuStream perspective, we have our particular focus on mission critical enterprise applications, but you can start to see with the portfolio that they presented where those various types of infrastructures and different cloud providers fit in that portfolio. So from that perspective, I think it was very interesting that the pivotal announcement may, from the meetings that I was in, people were asking us obviously about the AWS announcement. The pivotal one for me was very interesting. Having followed, worked extensively with the sort of Kubernetes ecosystem in the past. So bringing that together and now being able to tie the platform, the networking, with Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes together in a portfolio gives an enterprise the ability to kind of standardize on a vendor stack, a vendor ecosystem, but have best of breed technologies for those applications, right? So again, it's just now into the application layer, we're starting to acknowledge that there's going to be best fit, and I don't have to either try and force fit things into the wrong technologies, or I don't necessarily have to go to 9 different vendors to get my best fit portfolio. So that's just, and I think this is all reflective of us starting to see bigger uptake in the larger enterprises. It's just,
I agree. I think we both initially connected on the idea of federated cloud, and now it has evolved into multi-cloud. So where does VirtuStream fit into this picture? Like, where would you be able to talk about it?
Yeah, well, I think our position is pretty clear and unchanged. I mean, VirtuStream was built from the get-go to focus on what we call, mission critical enterprise applications, and the legacy there is around SAP. And that's an enormous vertical. Enterprises have enormous install bases of these very large legacy applications that they've invested tens of millions of dollars in. And those applications are not going away, right? You're not just going to get rid of that stuff and say, hey, I'm going to go rebuild it, right? The reason that you're adopting new technologies and that you're going cloud native is to increase agility and flexibility, and you're not doing that by rebuilding old stuff, right? You need to invest in new things. So, from our perspective, we are absolutely going to continue to focus on those sort of mission critical enterprise applications that run the business. And we see where we fit as part of that portfolio. You know, if you're developing new front end, new cloud native, new customer engagement systems, you're probably going to use, you know, the AWS style or a Microsoft style, Google style cloud, and that's just part of the portfolio. So, you know, we're going to continue on our platform, obviously working with Pivotal as part of the family on that to focus on those high security, high compliance, high performance, mission critical applications. But that position was, I think, well laid out on the slide in the keynote. You know, positioning VirtuStream alongside those other clouds, and it's a fit for purpose, right? The right cloud for the right use case, and I think we're going to continue to see tremendous growth in that.
I agree. VirtuStream is really strong with regards to SAP workloads and other legacy workloads, and it makes sense to put it for the legacy workload while using other platforms for the for modern workloads. This question is open to any of the panelists, but what I want to understand with regards to VirtuStream is, multi-cloud is supposed to break down the silos. That's why multi-cloud is interesting. So if we are going to keep VirtuStream as a silo, along with the other cloud providers out there, it's not going to. We are not going to maximize the ROI as an end user. I am not going to maximize the ROI. So there needs to be some way to integrate the data that lies in VirtuStream with the apps running on either Amazon or Pivotal Container Service. So what is the strategy out there? It's okay if you don't want to talk, if Pivotal or anybody, Pivotal wants to address the question, it's open. I am open to that. But I would love to understand what is the strategy to integrate the data out there?
Nobody wants to jump on that?
Yeah, he's on the infrastructure side, so that's why I opened it up to.
I should bring some crickets into the discussion here.
Yeah, no kidding. You know, again, look, I don't see, I don't necessarily see that, Chris, as hard silos, right? It's just not. You know, enterprises are running on-premise infrastructure. Most of it, almost all of it, VMware powered. That's not going to change. Right, you've got companies like VirtuStream that are focused on what you might have called enterprise cloud or enterprise class cloud. You know, typically focused on sort of you know, a scale up versus scale out infrastructures and applications. But particularly in our case, we're using a VMware stack on the back end, so we're still using we're using ESX. NSX is a part of that portfolio. We've announced an enterprise cloud connector at Dell EMC World that allows you to use vRealize automation to span those two on-premise, off-premise clouds. We're working with Pivotal to bring Cloud Foundry into that. So again, as you start to build those new applications, this is all going to be network aware. You talk about bringing NSX into the platform as a service layer, but it's at the infrastructure layer as well. So where those pieces sort of live is starting to be abstracted by those stacks. So you can pick fit for purpose infrastructure for your workloads. And the fact that they're in different silos is going to be abstracted by the platforms, by how you're developing and integrating those applications.
So can I assume VirtuStream to work with BOSH, and I can use Cloud Foundry as the abstraction layer to run the SAP application? Is that a scenario I can envision? Like, how does it really work?
Yeah, so you know, running your applications in Cloud Foundry on the VirtuStream cloud, absolutely possible. Stay tuned. But you know, you're going to do that. Are you going to encapsulate SAP inside Pivotal? Likely not, right? HANA, you know, HANA in many cases, you're still running on physical servers or in very large scale up VMs, right? It just, in many enterprise scenarios, it doesn't make sense to put that into some of those abstracted systems. But again, if you're abstracting the networking itself, the fact that you've got maybe an application here accessing the API on your SAP system here is abstracted, can still be secure, and can still be high performance. And in most cases, that stuff's being done over private networking.
Okay. So before we go to Brian, Scott, you want to add anything to this?
I would point out, building on what Rob was saying with regard to SAP, I think certainly if that's not the elephant and the dinosaur and the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the room, I don't know what is. SAP is not going away, and nor is its very large installed base of multi-million-dollar applications some of which have yet to fully amortize in most enterprises. But what the advent of containerization is telling engineers, especially software engineers, is that it will go away sometime. The problem is when. Now, we can kind of guess that it won't go away tomorrow, but the idea is now more and more that we need to plan for staging the transition away from the monolith and to a more distributed, more cost controllable, more secure model. We need a picture that looks more like that model than it did. John was talking about the energy not being in the conference last year and the energy having come back to the conference this year. Rob is kind of validating that. A lot of the thing about last year was VMware presented a vision that was kind of a future versus present vision that a lot of people weren't exactly subscribing to. They were looking at vSphere integrated containers, Project Photon, and looking at this future world, and this promise that NSX would be this long connecting bridge between the two worlds, and they weren't exactly seeing the connection. This year, they're seeing the connection more, the connection being made much more directly by bringing the Amazon people on stage, by bringing the Google people on stage, by demonstrating Kubo. That sort of thing lets people know, okay, when it comes time to finally switch off the lights on our legacy infrastructure, it could be 4 or 5 years from now, but when that happens, we'll have a plan for that. We'll be ready. The interfaces will be in place so that we just switch this plug in the interface with that plug in the same interface, and we'll have smoothly running applications and our customers won't see any downtime. And that's the plan. I think it's making people a lot happier this year.
So Brian, apart from the pivotal container service, what is that announcement that excited you? And then you could also talk about pivotal container service and the kind of reception you're getting to the announcement. I'll love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Rich. So, I think a lot of, as far as PKS, I think a lot of what John said was pretty good. I think it was fitting that the announcement was on day 2, since, a lot of what what we look to provide with BOSH is, those day 2 operations, things that John was talking about. So I think that worked out well. But I think, a theme I heard a lot at a lot of the sessions that I went to, and obviously that VMware is talking about a lot is, NSX. And specifically, I heard a lot more about NSXT this time around, as they sort of look at that as the way to, that network layer for multi-cloud, right? So you can use NSXT on, not just vSphere, but across all the cloud platforms. So that was a very interesting thing to hear more about. And I went to a couple of the NSX sessions where they got into a lot of detail about how the network works. And that really does bring a lot to the container orchestration as well. So having that built into Pivotal Container Service, I think is going to be pretty critical, as well as obviously all the goodness that BOSH brings. And the AWS announcement also was interesting. I mean, it is great to see those partners on stage, the Google and the Amazon on stage, like everyone's saying. I do agree. I think I read your post as well on that, Krish, but I agree. I think that is going to help some users in some areas. I think that'll be great for customers who kind of want a quick way into the public cloud infrastructure, but it doesn't seem super transformative as far as the way organizations should be building and developing applications these days, but it does sort of seem like a quick on-ramp to the cloud for customers who want it. And then just real quick, I was going to mention, I think what you were talking about with BOSH and PKS, just to kind of clear up real quickly, PKS is something that will work independently of PCF. So if you want to just use Pivotal Container Service on VMware or as a standalone application, it doesn't require PCF. I think we've talked to a lot of customers who do see the benefit in having both, and like Rob was saying, looking for the right tool for the job, the right place to run your workload. And I think there's a place both for PCF and PKS. As we talk to customers, we're hearing what fits best where. So you certainly can have both, and they will play very well together if they are in the same environment. But if all you need is Kubernetes, and that's where all of your apps are going to fit, PKS can run perfectly well on its own, without PCF. Obviously, it will require the BOSH layer, but not necessarily PCF. So anyway.
Chris, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Krishnan.
Sorry. So that's an awesome ending, Brian, because that leads to my next question, which is about using PKS when I don't need PCF. So does it make sense for me to use PKS and take the additional overhead that comes with it? For example, just for disclosure, I used to lead strategy for OpenShift team at Red Hat till end of 2015. And as a part of my work, I have done some competitive analysis between OpenShift and Cloud Foundry. One of the argument I have always put against Cloud Foundry with the Red Hat on at that time was it requires a lot of resources to get started. For example, I think at that time you needed 21 virtual machines to get started with the BOSH and Cloud Foundry. So I would love to hear a little bit about the resource needs for get going just with PKF without doing PCF. So is it going to, if it is going to involve a lot of resources like setting up an entire application platform, so what is the value I'll get as a customer instead of say going with Kubernetes running on top of one of the other platforms out there? So how is PKF solving a problem, and how is it having an advantage over other platforms there when I just go with PKF?
Yeah, I can chime in, and maybe John has more to say as well. But I think, well, first of all, as far as PCF, be on the lookout for our next release of PCF, which I think we're looking at sort of getting that initial footprint to be not quite as heavy. So look out for that in the next month or two. So with that out of the way, as far as PKS, it's vanilla Kubernetes, right? So there's nothing that we're adding on top of it. As far as additional orchestration or additional abstractions, it's just the Kubernetes release. I think if you heard the announcement, Rob Mee said it'll have constant compatibility with the Google Container Engine as well. So it'll be that Kubernetes. Now, the value you're getting out of it is the value primarily that BOSH is bringing, and also that some of the VMware components are bringing as well. In addition to the open service broker that is originating in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, but now can live on its own. I know OpenShift is using it, and sort of it's accepted across platforms. So you get the benefit of that, working directly with the Google Container Engine, and then you get all the day two goodness. I mean, we, like John mentioned, we heard a session from Eric Johnson about orchestrating Kubernetes itself, right? Kubernetes does a great job of orchestrating the applications for you, but a lot of companies are having problems figuring out how they orchestrate Kubernetes, right? And that's really where BOSH becomes the secret sauce there. And so hopefully that answers your
I
question.
think, I agree with you. I would definitely, in terms of just orchestrating Kubernetes, probably there are other platforms, including OpenShift out there. But the multi-cloud factor through BOSH, I think is very interesting for me. Because once I invest with PKS and have BOSH underneath, probably for me to use any of the clouds that's supported under BOSH will be an interesting opportunity. Yeah, that makes sense. John, do you have anything to add to it?
No, just really kind of pile on. If you want to be running Kubernetes in an enterprise with the latest version, with Google Container Engine compatibility, our process internally will basically be to wait for Google to have the production ready version of Kubernetes tested. They put it live, then we build that into PKS and roll that out. And if you're familiar with Concourse, the toolchain we use into BOSH to push updates through, some of our customers use that same toolchain to keep their platform live, and we'll be providing that same capability. So it's a CI/CD pipeline that updates the platform. So you'll just get you'll have a live pipeline to the latest version of Kubernetes, updating your platform. Plus, and the whole thing about GKE compatibility is, if you do want to run multi-cloud, there is a destination that is completely compatible. So you just take your containers and deploy them onto to GKE, and it's the same.
Yeah, and so I mean, the Google partnership is key, like you mentioned, and the VMware one is too, right? If you're already running vSphere in particular, this is a great way to get Kubernetes on there.
Yeah. Even for existing, the other set of customers who will find values or existing PCF customers, if they want to use Kubernetes for some part of their IT, I think they can do this. Okay, Rob or Scott, do you have anything to add on this topic before we go to the next topic?
I think I would probably point out that the container ecosystem at large has many layers to it. The simple orchestration of applications being just one layer. The staging of those applications to be orchestrated, which is what BOSH is about, is another layer. And yet there are more. There are developer pipelines that are involved. And there's also, with respect to the network, the virtual network fabric, how containers communicate with each other in an application is not just completely 100% restful. When you have sophisticated databases, when you have big data in place, you have different types of container network interfaces. And that does affect the architecture of the application. There's a kind of a myth out there that makes people think that all containers are like M&Ms, that the multicolor on the front is just for looks, but they all taste the same. Containers are not the same based on where they are architected for. So this will matter with respect to NSX particularly, because what VMware has created here is a better NSX delivery mechanism than it had last year. There's going to be more emphasis on wanting to move environments onto a platform that gets you NSX, that might get you that key to moving not just on Google Cloud and not just on IBM Cloud anymore, but also Amazon. And we might have Azure here in the future with that. So we've got the key to all clouds and a system that makes them all look homogeneous to the application. But container applications these days are built around systems like Weave with its very intricate SDN. And moving that to NSX may require some re-architecture. I know it will require some changes in the way of thinking about how these applications are designed and deployed. One of my favorite sessions at VMworld this year featured not only the aforementioned Eric Johnson, but Colin Humphreys, Pivotal's cloud CTO, who talked about his experiences with past organizations before he was at Pivotal, putting Cloud Foundry into a system using Chef. And he used a number of various forms of mushroom cloud photographs to demonstrate the results of trying to stage Cloud Foundry using Chef and other recipe-based CI/CD platforms. It was basically murder for him. And the reason he started really embracing BOSH and then Kubo was that BOSH takes a very different attitude. BOSH does not really treat the servers. It doesn't treat them as cattle. It doesn't treat them as very valuable at all. It treats them as scarecrows, just things you can knock over. BOSH is not there to keep the servers alive. BOSH is there to keep the services alive. And if it has to kill servers to do that, it will. The idea is to try to minimize downtime at all costs. So it has a very service-focused viewpoint, and it changes the way that these applications are deployed. In so doing, it could, in effect, change how they are secured, how resilience takes place, and to some extent, how they are architected by the developer. I think this will have some influence on design, and we will start to see organizations making that decision. Do we want to go with a plain vanilla open source 100% across the board M&M style of operation, or do we want to go a little bit into commercial and we steer a clear but perhaps safer path, safer meaning it's going to be backed by some money here, a commercial path that's backed by Pivotal and VMware and to some extent Google and Amazon.
Okay, I think I'll pick on that and ask John and Brian on a particular thing. Especially, you mentioned Chef and creating the problems with creating the CI/CD pipeline. I think John also alluded to the fact that BOSH streamlines that in a much more seamless way. So can BOSH be seen as an alternative to Chef and Puppet in the configuration management space when it comes to using containers? Or what I want to say is BOSH, Chef and Puppet are for the virtual machine era. So BOSH replaces them in the container era. So is it an accurate statement, or is it an accurate way to look at it?
Yeah, so Chef and Puppet have been around a long time. They've evolved a lot. But when I think about them and think where they started, I think you said procedural. You know, it's an approach to configuring servers that takes a certain set of steps. You know, so we've all seen them move more towards a defined state. You know, it's a kind of declarative model, but still, really, that's where their kind of DNA is. Whereas BOSH, I think and I'm going to get mixed up with day one and day two again, but from day one, BOSH was about managing distributed systems and while they're running. So yeah, sure, BOSH understands how to take a stem cell, take an operating system image, how to put a software release inside that and configure it. So it gets the thing ready, provisions resources from the underlying IaaS, so virtual machines, network storage. But then once BOSH has stood that up, then it will operate it. And it will watch for drift. It will try and keep bringing that distributed system, which in this case is Kubernetes, but it could be anything like I said, Redis, Rabbit, MQ, the Elastic Runtime in Cloud Foundry. Its mission in life is to keep that thing running on the infrastructure that you've provided. So I think when you going back to Colin's talk, when his comparison with using Chef and Puppet those were quite different tasks that the software was performing. And like I say, Chef and Puppet, they kind of see where BOSH has gone, and I think they talk about this declared kind of declarative state, but that's not the heart of those products. Whereas BOSH was always there to be able to run the system, that it upgrade dynamically. Okay.
Let's shift gears a little bit, and this is a common question which I would love to hear from almost all the panelists out here. Pivotal, John and Brian can give pivotal perspective on what you see, and Rob and Scott can talk about a more general perspective. I have always argued that Kubernetes is the Trojan horse for Google to enter into enterprise. So the way I sort of compare it to how Google released Chromecast for $35, got behind almost every TV in the United States, and finally they could take on the home media room market with Google Home and other things. So my opinion is Google is using Kubernetes as that kind of a Trojan horse to get enterprise workloads to move to Google's public cloud. So my question to Scott and Rob is, do you agree with the sentiment, or do you not agree? Then what is your take on that? My question to John and Brian is, isn't the Pivotal worried that in the long run, Pivotal, by supporting Kubernetes, you are handing over the workloads to Google Cloud? Once after a certain point, Google is not going to care whether Pivotal or Red Hat or anybody else who support Kubernetes exists in that ecosystem. So who wants to take first?
Well, I think I would say you and I, Krishnan, have worked on a new ebook for the new stack called The State of the Kubernetes Ecosystem. You contributed a lot of good material to that. So we both have had a lot of recent experience communicating with Google's people and with a lot of the contributors at Kubernetes. I kind of think I would disagree with you on the basic point that that in essence, Kubernetes is a Google Cloud delivery mechanism, a way of being that Trojan horse of injecting Google Cloud into environments. I kind of think there would be people who would stick a foot in that and say, you know, at this point, that's not really what we want. That I'm sure there were probably people a couple of years ago who saw this as an opportunity. These people would have been at Google. A few of those people have moved on, and they're still in the Kubernetes world, but they have moved on to other employers. the Kubernetes world is actually somewhat bigger than Google, and Microsoft is taking a more definitive role, especially with Brendan Burns and Gabe Monroy and Jesse Frazzle, who has just joined Microsoft. Their roles are getting bigger and bigger, and I see them playing a definitive role in not only steering Kubernetes toward a brighter future, but steering it toward an Azure colored future as well, and making sure Azure is in the picture. If there was a time for Kubernetes to have been a Trojan horse, maybe 2 years ago, but it was fast developing into something else that a lot of people needed, which is a much plainer, more straightforward way of the Borg assimilating us instead of us assimilating Google Cloud.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a valid point, especially the Microsoft argument is strong. And Amazon is also part of CNCF for whatever it is worth. They are part of CNCF. So I'm hoping that Kubernetes goes much beyond Google, the company Google. But let's see, I would love to hear other people's take on it too. But at least in the case of John and Brian, I would love to hear, is it an on-ramp to public clouds, and are you worried about that?
So, coming from probably the fastest growing open source software company, and I know a lot of our numbers aren't public, but we have an incredibly strong business built off building open source software, making it valuable to enterprises as they go through digital transformation. One of my analyst friends tweeted the other day, so who isn't in the CNCF these days? You look at it, everybody is in there. And the wonders of the way open source works is that we're all in there contributing. I have my friends back in Azure, Scott, like Brendan Burns. So the Azure Container Service, well, it supports Mesosphere, it supports Docker Swarm, but it's majoring on Kubernetes. And I just think too many people have skin in the Kubernetes game to let it kind of drift off and be manipulated by Google. And I don't think they're trying to do that, to be honest. I mean, it does cast a great glow onto the Google Cloud platform as the originator, but I don't see it as a Trojan horse in the way you described, just because open source doesn't work like that. Pivotal, we have fantastic pipelines for building platforms that we've been doing that with PCF for ages. So PKS, it's natural for us to do that, but that's our business. So we're very comfortable.
Rob or Brian, you want to take anything?
Yeah, I would jump in there. I don't know that it was a Trojan horse strategy. It may have been a strategy to disrupt other people's strategies, and in that sense, you may look at that as having been successful. I rather than seeing as a Trojan horse to adopt Google Compute Engine or Google Cloud, I think it may have democratized access to other infrastructure as a service platforms, right? Other cloud platforms, make it a little easier to publish applications that you can move around, and you can do so pretty rapidly and without a lot of the sort of historical sort of lock-in concerns to get around some of those concerns, whether they were legitimate or not. So that would be my view.
Okay. I can agree with that. In fact, Kubernetes took the standardization one layer above from the container to orchestration plane. And I think from that point of view, they might have democratized the access to public cloud. I agree. Brian, do you have anything to add before we go to the next question?
Not really. I mean, I think Google, I think I agree with everyone here. Maybe at one point it looked like that, but I think, and in a lot of ways, I think the Google Cloud platform or, Google's cloud kind of speaks for itself. There's products out there independent of Kubernetes that, are pretty powerful and good, just like there are in, Azure and Amazon too. So, maybe at one point it did, but I think now it's, like everyone said, it's kind of the community owns it.
Okay. Cool.
I will add this real quickly before you move on, Krishna.
Sure.
I'll tell you whose air Kubernetes has sucked out of the room. We have gone the better part of an hour, and none of us here has said the word Docker.
Yeah.
And you just said it before I did, and you knew what it was. That's if the Trojan horse took over any castle at all, it took over Docker's castle, and then it beat it to a pulp, and then it kind of flattened it at a very small level, and then it stomped on the grounds.
I fully agree.
Docker is not a part of the conversation. We went 2 days of VMworld keynotes. We talked about containerization on both those days. The word Docker wasn't uttered. I mean, that is the effect of Kubernetes.
I agree.
That is the point of detonation, if you will.
I agree. When I was at OpenShift team, I used to pull legs on Twitter saying that Kubernetes took gas out of Docker. So I think I will agree with that. John, go ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going with my comment about disrupting other people's. That's exactly where I was going with that.
Okay, got it. So,
but you were being nicer.
I was being purposefully oblique.
So I understand, Rob, like coming from a startup to a big company stuff, like I can understand. So the final question, which I want to quickly discuss in the last 10 minutes we have, can BOSH emerge as the standard for infrastructure orchestration, infrastructure services orchestration? Cloud Foundry put open service broker out there. We saw Red Hat and others jumping into it. Now that is emerging as a standard for various higher order services to talk to one another with the platform. So at the infrastructure level, it's a different ball game, because at the open broker, service broker API level, nobody had a stake. Like Red Hat didn't have a stake, so it was easy to get everybody aligned around that. Whereas on the infrastructure side, that is going against Red Hat's core business, and it's going against some of Amazon's core business, which is to have every workload on their public cloud. So can BOSH emerge as a standard for infrastructure services orchestration? Who wants to go first? Yeah, go ahead.
That was my answer.
In the immortal words of Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., yes.
But I would like to hear more about why you think it will be the standard. And why you think someone like Red Hat will accept BOSH as the way to orchestrate infrastructure services when they have their own offerings to go against it?
I've already made the point about BOSH effectively being a declarative system for defining how an application wants the infrastructure to be, and BOSH being a system that tries to accommodate as best it can, but is very centered on the running services and not necessarily the physical infrastructure beneath it. It can cannibalize the physical infrastructure if it needs to. This paints it in a very different light from other systems. It also creates kind of an alternative brand here, because now you will have this very first generation DevOps centric world of staging applications over here that's very centered on getting exactly the resources you need in place. And then you'll have the alternative, which is the declarative space. And that will be BOSH's, unless somebody wants to come up with an alternative right now. But I think now is too late. The time to have come up with a better alternative in that space would have been a long time ago, 5-6 months. But today, it's really BOSH has that space to itself, and I think it will continue to do so. So it will be a standard. Now, depending on Krishnan's phraseology, will it be the standard? No, because there will always be a skill set within organizations that are built toward that much more imperative way of declaring the physical infrastructure resources. That's going to be a skill for some time. Chef and Puppet are going to be with us for a long time. They are not exactly leaving the field. There will be some movement toward BOSH's space, but it will not be an all-over exodus. And I think there will be at least two ways of staging applications in the enterprise. BOSH will be one of them, and it will have that space to itself, but it will not, I don't know whether it'll be 50% of this space, but it will certainly own it's much more inquisitive way of working.
Okay. I do think I mean, just real quick. I agree. I think BOSH, has a part to play there. I do think it changes the story a little bit for for ops. And at Pivotal, we talk a lot about that, even in the PCF world, but really, with BOSH for up leveling operations to platform operations, right? It changes the job of operators a little bit. They're not provisioning servers and configuring servers, but they're configuring systems and distributed systems. So it takes more than just a tool. I think it'll take a culture change and sort of a skill set shift for that to happen.
Yeah, from a technical point of view, yes, it changes that BOSH definitely has a definitive advantage there. But one thing I would love to, if it has to become the standard, one thing that has to happen is not just Google becoming the first-class citizen under BOSH, Amazon, Azure, and even physical infrastructure. Everything should be a first-class citizen. For that to happen under an open source project, it has to be Amazon and Azure and probably Red Hat or for OpenStack and few others. They have to create that necessary connection and offer a commercial support around it. So is it going to happen? Like, is that kind of do you expect that kind of a future to evolve around BOSH open source project, not BOSH as seen as a Cloud Foundry project? Let us assume it has become a CNCF or some third-party project. So do you think there's something like that can emerge? There should be organization offering commercial support for it to become the standard in the industry. So is there a possibility for that? I'm just thinking out loud. Like it's not like I'm just thinking out loud. Will it happen? Will Microsoft support BOSH as a way to orchestrate their services? So is it going to happen? Yeah, John.
Yeah. So it's an interesting. This is probably another hour's discussion. Obviously, BOSH is an open source project under the Cloud Foundry Foundation today, as is Kubo. And when we run Cloud Foundry on Azure, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, then it's using BOSH. But there are other technologies. There are technologies that are native to the cloud providers. So within Azure, you have ARM templates, which are taking on automation and or kind of declarative behaviors. I guess something like CloudFormation in AWS. So BOSH starts to butt up against those, and I guess the Borg in GCP. So you get into a question of multi-cloud. It's okay, if as many enterprises are doing, I'm using at least 2 cloud providers. Do my ops staff, do they learn CloudFormation, and do they also learn ARM templates? Or is there one abstracted layer like BOSH that works in both places? Am I going to go all in on one cloud, or am I going to try and have this abstraction layer that helps me minimize the number of skills that my staff need? So I think that's the opportunity potentially for BOSH.
Okay. Anyone else wants to add to it?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in here, and I mean, obviously I'm not as deep there as the other guys, but I'll say, look, it took 7, 8, 9 years for us to get Google, AWS, and VMware into the same sort of keynotes. So there is resistance in this industry to creating those kind of blanket standards. So the cynical side of me, not that the technologists are cynical, but the cynical side of me would say that there'll probably be some underlying resistance to that. But what I would say is you referenced silos earlier, Christian, and we are going to see multi-cloud, and there are particularly good use cases for why you're going to want to run some applications in a cloud like ours and some applications in other clouds, and why you're going to want to build your own stuff. But there's no question we're going to want to see people moving away from their own infrastructure stacks, right, to stop buying and building their own things where they have full control over those orchestration layers and starting to string together multiple clouds. The silos are not going to go away. There will be multiple clouds. So if the industry is able to build a tool that can abstract how you use those clouds so that they don't feel like silos, that's going to be hugely useful. So that the question really is whether one layer can do that enough for the enterprises to adopt it, and if it can, then it absolutely will become the standard.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to conclude. Yeah. So anyone has anything else to add? Otherwise, I think we are coming close to the end of the hour, and we can close here. So Scott.
I'd say VMware knows how to produce a conference. They definitely rehearsed this one well. They pulled this off very smoothly. I was there with a lot of good friends, analysts in the field, Gene Bosman, Kurt Marco. A lot of them came away saying that this one was somewhat smooth. It got its point across. People were happy with the result. I think it made a better case this year than they did last year. Last year, the steam that I saw was coming out of people's ears. And this year, the steam that I saw was going to run the wheels that get the locomotive in motion. This is a much better operation this year than last year. I think we're hearing less and less about the compatibility or incompatibility of vSphere integrated containers and Project Photon, and we're hearing less about that for a reason, because they've got a track that really works and that people are interested in. And I see VMware definitely moving forward on this direction. We're going to hear more of this next year, and it's time to see what the alternative players, your old hunting grounds, Krishnan at Red Hat, they're going to have to go to the drawing board a little bit and come up with a way to make OpenShift and make OpenStack look a little better on paper.
I agree. I think I definitely agree with you on the characterization on this. Last VMworld, I thought, oh, okay, man, they are good beating around the bush. I don't know where they are going to go. After listening to this VMworld, I'm pretty confident that VMware is having a strategy. I wouldn't say they are executing it well at this point, but they are having the right strategy. And if they execute well, of course, with the support of Pivotal, I think they will be on a strong footing. Thanks everybody for your time, and it was a great conversation. And for the listeners, this panel will be available as a recording soon, so I will share it on the social channel. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for.
Bye.